In light of Turkey and Azerbaijan's unprecedented aggression against Armenia and Artsakh, we wanted to take a look at the way in which the Armenian American diaspora community can advance certain priorities to ensure the US government moves towards a stronger position in holding Azerbaijan and Turkey accountable for their aggression. So we wanted to take a look at where US policy has been, where US policy is, and what we can do to improve that policy and move the needle forward on this issue. So I think the best place to start is back in the 90s and what the United States was doing during the Artsakh Liberation War. So I want to take it away.
So I think it's important to set historical context so that we have a good understanding of what our policy priorities are now today. One of the first and most landmark bills passed during the Artsakh conflict was the Freedom Support Act, which was basically a United States policy that would help aid democratically and economically post-Soviet states going through dissolution and going into independence. Part of that bill included a section 907, which specifically stated that all aid to Azerbaijan, both direct aid and military aid, was banned. And this was as a response specifically to the blockade imposed by Azerbaijan and Turkey during the Artsakh conflict on Armenia. Now, that section 907, was upheld for almost 10 years. Following September 11th, the United States passed a bill that gave the president the authority to waive that provision in an effort to help combat quote-unquote terroristic measures. The United States waived that, and the policy repercussions of that we see today here in 2020 is that in the last 2 years, the United States government has sent over $100 million in direct military aid to Azerbaijan. We started out from having zero aid during the conflict to today seeing this balloon to astronomical levels. Besides that, we are going to be pursuing policies that look to impose sanctions, both sweeping sanctions against Azerbaijan and Turkey, and individual sanctions on the leadership of those countries. And maybe, Alex, you can talk about the Magnitsky Act.
So one of the more specific sanctions measures that we're looking as a community to have imposed on Azerbaijan and Turkey is the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act was established in 2012, and it was in direct response to Russia effectively murdering someone who had exposed major corruption within the Russian government. And the sanctions measures themselves were to impose specific targeted sanctions on individuals involved in that murder. Now, 4 years later, in 2016, the US government expanded those sanctions. They're called the Global Magnitsky Act now, and the idea is that the United States can sanction individuals who have been involved in the perpetration of human rights abuses, who are representatives of foreign governments. There is a direct case for the application of Magnitsky Act sanctions to the case of Azerbaijan and Turkey in terms of Turkey and Azerbaijan having made decisions deliberately targeting civilian populations, engaging in war crimes, major human rights abuses. So the Magnitsky Act would be applied to key individuals in both the Azeri and Turkish governments involved in the commissioning of those war crimes. And then, as you mentioned, in addition to those specific targeted sanctions, we're looking at sweeping sanctions against Turkey and Azerbaijan, punitive sanctions against Turkey and Azerbaijan as a means of curtailing their belligerent actions. And then, of course, we're looking at the immediate cessation of all military assistance to Turkey and Azerbaijan to ensure that US taxpayer dollars are not being spent for the commissioning of war crimes against Armenians in Artsakh and Armenia itself. So on this note, we've seen in the last couple of days statements come out of both the Biden and Trump camps that have addressed this issue of Azerbaijan, its aggression, the Artsakh issue in Armenia, in a more comprehensive way than we've seen really ever in US foreign policy, at least since the war. So maybe we can start with what we've seen come out of Pompeo in recent days and where that leaves us now.
So this is from a recent interview that Pompeo gave I want to note that this wasn't necessarily an official State Department statement, but it was a statement made by the head of the State Department during an interview. Here we have him saying, "We now have Turkey, who has stepped in and provided resources to Azerbaijan, increasing the risk, increasing the firepower that's taking place in this historic fight." He then continues on to say, "We're hopeful that the Armenians will be able to defend against what the Azerbaijanis are doing, and that they will all, before that takes place, get the ceasefire right and then sit down at the table and try to sort through this." Now, this was Pompeo's statement. Following that, we had a statement from Biden and his campaign.
Yeah, we've actually seen Biden put out two separate documents in support of the Armenian people or addressing this issue in recent days, one 2 days ago and one today. The first one was basically, to summarize it and to quote part of it as well, Biden's ask was that the Trump administration must tell Azerbaijan that it will not tolerate its efforts to impose a military solution to this conflict, and also it must make clear to Armenia that regions surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh cannot be occupied indefinitely, and that credible negotiations on a lasting resolution of the conflict must commence immediately once a ceasefire is concluded. And then in the one that came out today, the Biden-Harris statement, it said, Joe Biden will push for lasting peace in the region, reinvigorating U.S. engagement in resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. He also directly mentions the need to prevent interference by third parties, including nations like Turkey and the foreign mercenaries paid to commit crimes against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And in addition to that, as a side note, he also says that Joe Biden will fully support U.S. aid to Armenia, in addition to U.S. demining and humanitarian assistance to Nagorno-Karabakh, which we as a community have battled this year in terms of ensuring assistance to the Halo Trust to do humanitarian demining. So with all this being said...
And I think just on that note, it's important to state when we're talking about the increase in military funding to Azerbaijan, at the same time, Armenia is getting not a decrease, but a complete cut of demining funding. This isn't direct military funding. This isn't economic assistance. This is funding that goes specifically for demining, a peacekeeping, safety-keeping measure that has been cut in this last year, while the aid to Azerbaijan has ballooned.
Definitely. And I guess going back into Pompeo's statement, what do you think about it? What do you think? Where does it leave us? Does it move the needle? Does it change anything in terms of the U.S. government's position on this issue?
I think this is the first statement from a U.S. government administration, high-level administrator, stating that Turkey is involved in this conflict outright, stating that Turkey is providing mercenaries, stating that Azerbaijan is the aggressor. However, the problem in it, which is the problem in most statements that we've seen from the OSCE to the UN, now to the United States, is it basically leaves Armenians hanging. It says, literally, word by word, we hope that you can fight this more or less on your own. So it's a statement, and it is a direct indictment on the aggression put on by Azerbaijan and Turkey, but there's no concrete, tangible action or any statement regarding that.
And you would expect that, I mean, if you're in a position of power in the United States, something like hoping Armenia will defend itself, I mean, it's a nice sentiment, but the US actually has power in the situation to change the outcome. So saying something like that without putting actions to those words is totally pointless. And but I would say that we did see, I think it was a week ago now, Pompeo refer to this as a fight over a piece of real estate. So it does seem like, on that note, at least, there's
a change in narrative.
Exactly,
somewhat.
exactly.
But in tangible action, none.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I guess moving on to the Biden statement, there's very little more that you can add to this. I mean, again, the statement doesn't take a particularly definitive position on the outcome or the US's role. I mean, we've seen negotiations take place for the last 25 years now under the OSCE framework. And going back to that issue of the false equivalency and the failure to hold Azerbaijan accountable for its aggressions, yes, we do have now a statement that is implicating Turkey and the use of foreign mercenaries. Yes, we do see the acknowledgement of Azerbaijan's aggression in this instance. But we also have this point that comes through in the statement about Armenia needing to clear the region, must make clear to Armenia the regions cannot be occupied indefinitely. It's still floating this narrative of occupation that Azerbaijan has been using to try to delegitimize and discredit the legitimate right to self-determination that the people of Artsakh have.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the United States, which has been a country that has championed, quote unquote, being the world's police, being the upholders and keepers of democracy and freedom and peace, are now putting out statements giving us their well wishes when, under less evidence and under less pretense, they've entered wars themselves. Now, that's not what's being asked of them. All that's being asked is a complete cut to military aid to countries that have shown to be committing human rights abuses.
Yeah.
Today, Bellingcat confirmed the execution of 2 POWs. Churches have been bombed. Civilians have been shelled. This is not a conflict where we're trying to create false parity. This is somewhere that the United States can do more than make a statement. And we're not even asking for some direct intervention. We're asking for the cutting of funding that is going to push and procure war crimes.
And it's important you bring that up because, and this is kind of looping it back to the first point you made about Section 907. Biden, back in the 90s, was a senator, and he was someone who strongly advocated for the passage of Section 907. So you have now someone who is currently running for president, who has put out a statement on this issue that makes no mention of Section 907 at any point, no effort to reaffirm it or say that there should be a removal of the president's authority to waive Section 907. So in a sense, we're still kind of trying to build back up to the position the United States had back in the 90s, which was a definitive policy of ending military assistance to Azerbaijan because of Azerbaijan's blatant aggression against Armenia and Artsakh. So we're still not back there yet.
And it's important to note that Section 907, which was amended after 9/11 and gave the president the authority to waive that on their own admission, was waived by both Republicans and Democrats. George Bush waived it, Barack Obama waived it, Donald Trump waived it. So this hasn't just been a Republican or a Democratic policy. This has been the policy, the long-standing, almost 20-year policy of the State Department to completely overlook that section and to waive it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Section 907 was in many ways implemented as a way of kind of assessing and assuring U.S. interests in this part of the world, not just the former USSR, but more generally speaking, the U.S.'s position as, like you mentioned, a world leader, as an authority on issues of human rights and democracy. And and this could be a subject for a totally different discussion, but we need to look at the utility of Azerbaijan as a partner to the United States. And when we're talking about Azerbaijan's engagement with Turkey and Turkey's direct, unprecedented, overt role in this conflict, is Turkey a regional stabilizer? Is Turkey a force for good in the region? Is Turkey actually acting to the enforcement and betterment of U.S. interests and the interests of peace and stability in the region? Or is it, which I think it is, a major barrier to stability, a major destabilizing presence in the region at large, and its enabling of Azerbaijan in the context of this conflict as being a major issue that the United States need to take seriously?
And I think you hit the nail on the head for all those questions. The answer is yes, and that answer has been given by Pompeo. You're asking who the aggressor is. The statement included Azerbaijan and Turkey explicitly. So now we have a statement. What we're missing and what we have been missing is any sort of action.
And that is the unfortunate state of affairs right now. But don't despair. There are many ways in which our community can be involved in helping shift the needle and ensuring that we are able to move the United States and use our collective voice as a community to really advance this position and push for change. And we've already seen, the way in which this narrative has progressed and the use of our collective voice through protests and demonstrations and access to media has brought a level of awareness and attention to this issue that we've never seen before.
To a point where at Sunday's rally, where over 100,000 Armenian Americans came out to protest in LA, Adam Schiff, one of the highest ranking Democrats in office, stood up and said that the United States is ready to recognize Artsakh. And I think even that, though a statement coming from a high-level policymaker, is something to pay attention to and is something that the community itself has helped move the needle on.
Absolutely.
And I also think it's important for the community to remember, and lots of folks ask, what is the move? What is the target? And there is no singular target. The ANC is going to be pushing for wide sweeping sanctions. We're going to be pushing for the enforcement of the Magnitsky Act. We're going to be pushing for the enforcement and the respect to Section 907. All of these things are going to be markers for us to hit. There's not going to be one solution. It's going to be all of us working towards the betterment and the passing of these policy points.
And the best way to engage with this as Armenian Americans, as people who want to see change on this issue, is to go to anca.org/alert. That site will take you to a form where you can call your Congress member or you can write to your Congress member and demand change. And that form and who it's directed to changes based on our immediate priorities. So right now we're pushing for Magnitsky sanctions to be applied against Azerbaijan and Turkey. We're also looking at range of sweeping sanctions, and there is always an opportunity for our community to engage with these issues. So the best way to do it, anca.org/alert.
This goes for Armenians living anywhere in the United States. We're incredibly effective in mobilizing the congressmen and senators that live within our districts and our largely Armenian populated districts. But if you're an Armenian that doesn't live in one of those, you still have power and a voice. In fact, even more so, because you can amplify that voice to congressmen and senators that haven't been exposed to our issues. So if you're from a small community in the United States, you have just as much power as our large communities, because you can be a vessel to speak truth to power.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we'll sign off for this edition, and we'll join you again next time.